A police officer and his daughter thought they were just saving an old dog for $5. But what they uncovered led to a secret military experiment, a criminal empire, and the most powerful story of loyalty and redemption you'll ever hear. The late summer sun of Colorado burned softly against the dusty streets of Pine Hollow, a town small enough that everyone knew the color of their neighbor's truck and the sound of their dog's bark. The day was folding itself into golden amber light, the air heavy with the mingled scent of pine and warm asphalt. Officer Nathan Reed walked slowly beside his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, holding 2 paper cups of lemonade they'd bought from a kid's stand near the courthouse square. It was his first full day off in weeks, a small miracle in itself, and he intended to make it count. Nathan wasn't the sort of man who smiled easily, but something about being beside Lily softened the edges of his face. He was a big man, 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad from years in uniform and hands that looked like they belonged to someone who could rebuild a truck engine from memory. His light brown hair had started to gray at the sides, but the tired calm in his green eyes said more about the years he'd lived than his age ever could. His badge was off, his gun locked at home, but a cop never really stopped being a cop. Even as he strolled through town, he noticed everything. The flicker of a security light above the bank, the tremor in the voice of a woman arguing on her phone, the silent rhythm of traffic lights changing along Main Street. Lily, skipping beside him, was the opposite in every way. 10 years old and full of life, with copper blonde hair flying out of her ponytail and a summer dress speckled with lemon patterns. She talked fast, laughed easily, and carried that pure kind of curiosity only children still believe in. Her small hand swung from Nathan's like a pendulum of energy. "Daddy, can we stop by the old bookshop before dinner?" she asked, tilting her head. "Mrs. Calloway said she found a book about wolves in Alaska." Nathan chuckled under his breath. "Wolves again, huh?" "Not wolves huskies," she corrected firmly. "They're heroes. They can find people in snowstorms and pull sleds through blizzards. Grandma said—" Her voice faded as they reached the corner of 5th and Alder Street. That was when she stopped so suddenly that lemonade splashed onto her sandals. There, by the cracked brick wall of the old train station, sat a man holding a sign. The cardboard was wrinkled, the letters scrawled in black marker. 5 for the beast. At first glance, Nathan might have kept walking. Pine Hollow had its share of drifters, men who slept behind dumpsters and begged outside diners, their faces shaped by bad luck and hard living. But this one wasn't like the others. He sat motionless, almost statuesque, his skin leathered and dry, his eyes too alert to belong to someone entirely lost. His beard was gray and uneven, his plaid shirt stained and torn at the sleeves. But it wasn't him that caught Nathan's attention. It was the dog lying beside him. A husky, though husky barely fit anymore. The animal's ribs were visible beneath a dull, matted coat of gray and white fur. One ear hung limp, as if it had been torn long ago and healed wrong. His paws were cracked, his muzzle streaked with old scars. And yet, the eyes. Icy blue, clear and steady even through exhaustion. There was something ancient and knowing in them, something that stopped Lily mid-step. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging his sleeve. "Look at him." Nathan frowned. He could tell at a glance the animal was older, maybe 9 or 10, and malnourished. A working dog by the build of its chest and the way its head rested, half alert even in fatigue. But there was something else, something that sent a strange chill up his spine. Lily crouched down, her little sundress brushing the pavement. "Hi," she said softly to the dog. "It's okay. You're safe." The man holding the sign looked up, his eyes narrowing. "You want the mutt?" His voice was rough, like gravel dragged over steel. $5. Take him." Nathan straightened, instinct rising. "Why are you selling him?" The man shrugged. "Not much of a story. Found him outside the quarry a few weeks ago. Thing won't eat unless I'm around. Keeps trying to run back there. Don't know what's wrong with it. Bad leg. Ain't worth feeding." Lily's eyes shimmered with a kind of sadness that only children know. Pure, helpless empathy. "Please, Daddy," she whispered. We can help him. Nathan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Sweetheart, we don't know anything about this dog. He could be dangerous, sick. He's not dangerous, she said immediately, her small hand reaching out. The husky lifted his head weakly, sniffed her fingers, then ever so gently pressed his muzzle against her palm. It was a moment so fragile Nathan almost missed it. The man's beast had just leaned into kindness. Nathan felt something inside him shift. $5, the man repeated, impatience creeping into his tone. Take it or leave it. Nathan studied him. Something was off the way the man avoided his gaze, the slight tremor in his left hand, the way his foot tapped nervously as if waiting to flee. A lie was hiding there, but Nathan couldn't tell what kind. He pulled out his wallet anyway, took out a crumpled $5. You got a name for him? The man snorted. Name? Nah, don't need one. Call it whatever you want. He snatched the bill and stood, slinging a dirty canvas bag over his shoulder. Without another word, he walked off down the alley, vanishing between the buildings like smoke. Nathan watched him go, frowning. No goodbye, no leash, just gone. When he turned back, Lily was already on her knees, arms wrapped around the husky's neck. We'll take care of you, she whispered. I promise. Nathan crouched beside them, feeling the roughness of the dog's fur under his hand. Beneath the grime and the scars was a heartbeat steady, strong, defiant. All right, he murmured, but he's your responsibility, Lily. Her smile lit up the fading evening. Thank you, Daddy. That night, their small house on Maple Street smelled of soap, wet fur, and summer rain. The husky stood in the bathtub, still and silent as Lily scrubbed dirt from his coat with gentle hands. She hummed softly under her breath, an old tune her mother used to sing before she passed away. Nathan leaned against the doorway, watching. The dog's head drooped, but his eyes never closed. Trust, it seemed, was still difficult for him. Daddy, Lily said after a while, her voice quiet. Look. Nathan knelt beside her. Beneath the dog's wet fur, around his neck, was a faint hairless ring-like. An old collar had rubbed the skin raw long ago. And on the left side of it, faint but visible, a series of small, etched numbers burned into the leather that still clung to one piece of torn fabric. K-19. Nathan ran his thumb over it. That's not a pet tag, he murmured. Looks military. Lily frowned. Was he in the army? Maybe, Nathan said, thinking back to the old police K-9 units he'd worked with. The build, the discipline, the quiet alertness, it all fit. But what was a trained dog doing chained up on a street corner for $5? When the bath was over, Lily wrapped the husky in a towel, his fur fluffing up in patches. She looked at Nathan expectantly. We have to name him. Nathan thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. What about Balto? Her eyes widened. Like the hero dog? From the movie? Yeah, he said, standing up. Seems fitting. Balto, she whispered, turning the name over like a secret. The husky lifted his head slightly, one ear twitching. That night, as the moon rose pale over Pine Hollow, Nathan sat on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the dog lying by the screen door. The world was quiet. Crickets sang. Inside, Lily slept peacefully for the first time in days. At some point near midnight, a sound woke him, the faint scratch of claws against the floor. Nathan glanced over. Balto was standing at the door, eyes fixed outside, ears erect despite the broken one. His fur bristled slightly as he let out a low, uncertain whine. Nathan rose and opened the door. The dog stepped into the cool night without hesitation. The air smelled of pine sap and the distant hum of trains. Where are you going, boy? Nathan murmured. Balto didn't answer, of course. He simply turned his head toward the outskirts of town, the direction of the old airfield long abandoned, since before Lily was born, and let out a low, mournful sound that sent chills through Nathan's skin. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't even quite a howl. It was a memory, the kind of sound that carried loss, purpose, and something else Nathan couldn't name yet, something waiting to be found. He watched the dog for a long time that night, his mind turning over the strange code burned into that old collar. K-19. And for the first time in years, Officer Nathan Reed felt the echo of a mystery-stirring one that began not with a crime scene or a suspect, but with a broken dog who refused to give up on something he could still remember. The quiet town of Pine Hollow slept on, unaware that an old shadow had just returned to its streets, and Balto, the dog who remembered, had finally found the trail home. The next morning arrived with a chill sharper than August should have allowed. The pine trees outside Nathan Reed's house rustled in a cold wind that whispered of mountains and storms. The sky was pale and brittle, streaked with thin gray clouds like brushstrokes over a canvas of light. In the small kitchen, Nathan poured black coffee into a chipped mug while Lily sat at the table, half asleep, cereal spoon dangling from her fingers. Balto lay by the back door, his fur still damp in places from the previous night's bath. The morning light revealed his true coloring steel gray along the back, fading to white around his face and paws. He looked cleaner, but also somehow older, as if the bath had washed away more than dirt. When he lifted his head, those pale blue eyes found Nathan's, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop moving. Nathan set down his mug. "He's been quiet since last night." Lily yawned, rubbing her eyes. "He didn't sleep much. I heard his claws on the floor. He kept looking out the window. Toward the airfield?" She nodded, like something's calling him. Nathan leaned back against the counter. The word airfield stirred something in him, a memory of the old military base just outside of Pine Hollow, long since decommissioned after a flood and a fire wiped out most of the records. It had once been a small hub for supply planes and K-9 units during the late 90s. He hadn't thought about it in years. At 9:01 a.m., Nathan leashed Balto and walked with him through the neighborhood. The dog didn't tug, didn't hesitate. Instead, he moved with steady purpose, his head low, nose twitching with an intensity that felt more like recollection than curiosity. When they reached the end of Main Street, Balto stopped abruptly and turned his head north toward the hills that bordered the outskirts of town. Nathan frowned. "You've got somewhere to be, don't you?" By afternoon, curiosity had become a pulse beneath his skin. He couldn't shake the image of those carved numbers on Balto's old collar. K-19. It sounded less like an ID tag and more like a designation. Military. Classified. Forgotten. When Lily came home from her friend's house, she found her father rummaging through a cardboard box filled with old police files. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Something that shouldn't exist anymore." She blinked. "That sounds like a movie line." Nathan smiled faintly but didn't answer. In the bottom of the box, he found a manila folder, the edges frayed and yellowed. The label read, "Pine Hollow, Decommissioned Airfield, Restricted Access." Inside were a few printed reports, dated over 15 years ago, complaints about storage containers, missing property tags, and a fire that destroyed a warehouse designated Unit 19. He froze. Unit 19. By dusk, Nathan had made up his mind. He loaded Balto into the truck, called up Lily's babysitter, and headed north. The gravel road to the airfield was overgrown with weeds, the gate half fallen, the old warning signs eaten by rust. The sun was sinking fast, burning orange across the peaks, and the air smelled faintly of rain and old metal. Balto jumped down from the truck bed before Nathan could open the door. He trotted ahead, tail low, nose to the ground. His limp was noticeable, but his pace never faltered. The dog moved like a soldier returning to a battlefield. Nathan followed, flashlight in hand. "Easy, boy. I don't like this place either." The hangars loomed in the distance, massive skeletal shapes of corrugated steel and broken glass. The largest one, Hangar 4, had its door half collapsed, revealing only blackness beyond. Balto stopped there, his body rigid, his ears pricked. Then he gave a single low bark. Nathan shined his light into the darkness. Dust motes floated through the beam, swirling like ghosts. Inside, the concrete floor was cracked, the walls smeared with soot from the long-ago fire. There was debris everywhere, rusted lockers, burnt pallets, and a half-buried metal cabinet near the far corner. Balto patted inside. He sniffed around the cabinet, then began pawing at the floor. The sound of claws against metal echoed through the hollow space. Nathan knelt beside him and brushed away the dirt. Beneath the grime was something unexpected, a metal hatch, its handle bolted shut. The edges were marked with faint numbers. K-19. Jesus, Nathan whispered. His pulse quickened. You led me here, didn't you? Balto sat back on his haunches, watching quietly as Nathan used his pocket knife to pry at the lock. It gave way with a groan. When he lifted the hatch, a rush of cold, stale air spilled upward. The smell of oil and rust filled his lungs. Inside was a metal box military issue, olive green, the kind used to store classified material. Nathan pulled it out carefully. His flashlight beam caught a small label on the lid. Property of Project K-19. Handler access only. He hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, faded but clear enough to tell their story. Soldiers standing beside dogs, huskies, shepherds, even a few retrievers, each marked with a number on their harness. One photo made Nathan's throat tighten. A younger version of Balto, his fur brighter, his eyes alert, standing beside a man in fatigues. The man's name tag read H. Hanley. Nathan's stomach turned. He remembered that name. Dr. Howard Hanley, a government veterinarian turned researcher, dismissed after allegations of unauthorized behavioral experiments on K9 units. It had made local news for a week before disappearing entirely. No trial, no closure. Balto whined softly, pressing his nose against the photo. His body trembled, not in fear, but in recognition. Nathan took a breath. You were his, weren't you? You were part of K-19. He sifted through the papers beneath the photos. Medical records, performance logs, and then hidden at the bottom, a folded document labeled Transfer Order, Classified. The ink was smudged, but one sentence stood out. Subject B12, Balto, Prototype Memory Conditioning Subject, to be relocated under supervision of Dr. H. Hanley. Behavior indicates residual imprinting patterns. Nathan's skin crawled. Memory conditioning. He'd read enough about military testing to know what that meant. Attempts to alter or trigger specific behavioral responses through electrical or chemical manipulation. They'd tried it on dogs. He sank back on his heels, flashlight shaking in his grip. Balto had stopped moving. He stood facing the far wall, where smoke stains still painted the shape of something rectangular. A door once sealed, now hidden behind years of ash. Nathan approached, pressed his hand against the metal surface, and felt the faint impression of welded hinges. He traced it down, finding a small latch covered in grime. When he pulled it, the wall groaned. A narrow panel shifted open, revealing a shallow crawl space. Inside, buried under a tangle of wires and broken crates, lay another crate with stenciled lettering. Experimental equipment. Do not move. Nathan didn't touch it. Instead, he stepped back, his heart thudding. Come on, Balto. We've seen enough. The husky didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the crate, as if he could hear something Nathan couldn't. Then slowly, Balto raised his head and let out a deep, haunting howl that filled the hangar and bled into the twilight beyond. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, a cry for the ones who hadn't survived, for the forgotten, for the betrayed. Nathan stood frozen, the sound cutting through the air like a prayer. When it finally faded, the wind picked up through the broken panels of the hangar roof, scattering dust and echoes alike. Nathan looked down at the dog beside him. Whatever they did to you, he murmured, it's over now. I'll make sure of it. As they turned back toward the truck, Nathan's flashlight beam caught something near the doorway, a footprint, half pressed into the dust. Too fresh, too recent. Someone else had been there. And if Dr. Hanley's name had truly resurfaced, Pine Hollow was about to remember a part of its past it had buried for too long. Balto limped beside Nathan, silent but watchful, his blue eyes glinting faintly under the fading light. He had done his duty. He had brought his human to the truth. But the truth, Nathan would soon learn, was only beginning to show its teeth. The rain started sometime after midnight, drumming against the windows of the small house on Maple Street like an impatient visitor. Nathan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of the storm stitching through his restless thoughts. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that photograph again. The younger Balto standing beside Dr. Hanley, the man's hand resting on the dog's head like he owned him. The same dog that now slept at the foot of Nathan's bed, older, scarred, and haunted. Lightning flashed. Balto stirred, ears twitching. His low growl rolled through the dark like distant thunder. Nathan sat up immediately. He reached for the flashlight on his nightstand, but before he could flick it on, the power went out. The house fell into heavy silence, broken only by the rhythm of rain and the dog's steady rumble. "Balto?" he whispered. The husky rose, tail stiff, moving toward the hallway. A shadow flickered past the window, faint but real. Nathan's instincts snapped alive. He moved to the dresser, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out his service weapon. Another flash of lightning illuminated the yard through the blinds, and that's when he saw them. Two figures moving by the fence line, one carrying what looked like a crowbar, the other a flashlight dimmed with red film. Someone was in his yard. "Lily," he hissed, crossing the hall to her room. She was still asleep, her small form curled under a blanket patterned with stars. Nathan touched her shoulder gently. "Sweetheart, wake up. Now." She blinked, disoriented. "Daddy." "Quiet. We're going downstairs." Balto was already there, standing at the back door, his body a tense silhouette against the occasional flicker of lightning. His hackles rose, his muzzle wet from the rain blowing in through the cracks. The sound of the doorknob rattling froze Nathan in place. Then came the slow creak of wood under weight. Someone was on the porch. Nathan motioned Lily behind the sofa. He crouched beside the door, heart pounding, and waited. Another rattle. Then silence. He held his breath. The only sound now was the rain. Then, crash! The window in the kitchen shattered inward. A man climbed through, boot hitting the tile. Balto lunged before Nathan could stop him. The husky hit the intruder full force, his jaws locking onto the man's arm. The attacker screamed, stumbling back, slamming into the counter. Nathan rushed forward, weapon drawn, flashlight beam slicing through chaos. "Police! Drop it!" The second figure appeared in the doorway, a heavy-set man in a raincoat. He raised a gun, a compact pistol wrapped in duct tape for grip. Nathan fired once. The bullet hit the doorframe beside the man's head, splintering wood. The man ducked, cursed, and ran. The first attacker kicked Balto off and followed, blood trailing from his sleeve. Nathan darted to the window, but they were already gone, vanishing into the storm. Only tire tracks in the mud remained. Balto limped back to Lily, panting, his fur streaked with blood, not his own. Lily's small hands clung to his neck. "Is he okay?" "He's fine," Nathan said, though his voice shook. "But they'll be back." He called it in to dispatch, but static swallowed half his words. The storm had knocked out more than the power. The radio tower was down. He looked at Balto, who sat quietly now, staring toward the fence line. There was no panic in the dog's eyes, only recognition, as if he knew exactly who had come. By morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a heavy silence that felt unnatural. Nathan's yard was a wreck. Muddy footprints, a broken window, the smell of gasoline faint on the air. The intruders had tried to burn something, but the rain had saved them from it. He found a small black patch of melted plastic near the fence. Inside, half dissolved by water, was a metal tag stamped with 3 letters. HLC, Hanley Laboratories Corporation. Nathan's stomach sank. Hanley wasn't just a rogue researcher. He turned his experiments into a business. That afternoon, while Lily napped on the couch, Nathan pieced together everything he knew. Hanley's disappearance years ago, the missing K9s, the old hangar labeled K19, and now this. People willing to break into a police officer's home for one aging husky. Balto lay by the window, watching the street. Every so often his ears would flick, and he'd let out a low, uncertain growl. Nathan knelt beside him. "They were looking for you, weren't they?" Balto's head lifted slightly, his pale eyes meeting Nathan's. There was no doubt in them. That night, when the wind began again, Nathan made his decision. He packed his sidearm, flashlight, camera, and notepad into a duffel. "We're going back," he told Balto quietly, "to the hangar." He thought Lily was asleep. She wasn't. When he pulled out of the driveway 15 minutes later, she slipped through the side door, raincoat over her pajamas, and climbed into the truck bed behind a stack of blankets. The drive was long, the forest road slick with mud. By the time Nathan reached the hangar, the moon was gone behind thick clouds. He parked with the headlights off, flashlight beam cutting through mist. Balto jumped down first, his body low, muscles tight. He moved ahead again, nose to the ground, until he reached the same corner of the hangar where they'd found the hatch. But something was different. The hatch was open. Inside, faint light flickered from a lantern. Nathan crouched low, peering through the gap in the wall. Two men were inside, one with a clipboard, another hauling metal crates onto a dolly. They wore uniforms with the HLC logo, and behind them, partially visible under a tarp, were cages. Dogs, at least a dozen. Some whined softly. Others didn't move at all. Nathan's throat tightened. It wasn't over. He motioned to Balto to stay, then pulled his phone to take photos. But before he could capture more than a few frames, a hand shot out of the dark and grabbed him by the collar. "Evening, officer." Nathan spun, elbowing backward. The flashlight fell, its beam spinning across the dirt and catching a face. Gaunt, sharp-eyed, with a scar that curved from chin to temple. Dr. Hanley. "Didn't think you'd find me so soon," Hanley said, smiling faintly. "But I suppose Balto's nose still works." "Step back," Nathan said, weapon raised. "It's over." Hanley didn't flinch. "Over? Oh no, Officer Reed. We're just getting started." He nodded toward the cages. "Do you even know what that dog is?" "He's not a pet. He's the last successful prototype. The only one that remembered what we taught him." Balto appeared at Nathan's side, growling low. His fur bristled, teeth bared. "See?" Hanley whispered. "He remembers me." Nathan's hand trembled. "You experimented on him." "We enhanced him," Hanley said coldly. "You people waste potential. These dogs were soldiers, smarter, faster, loyal beyond reason, and you shut it all down because someone got squeamish." He stepped forward. "Give him to me, and I'll forget you were ever here." Nathan shook his head slowly. "You'll never touch him again." Hanley's face hardened. "Then you'll both die here." Before Nathan could react, a figure moved behind him. One of the men from inside the hangar, swinging a metal pipe. The blow missed his head by inches, crashing against a crate. Balto lunged. He struck the man's arm, dragging him down. Snarls and shouts filled the hangar. Nathan fired a warning shot into the air. "Police! Drop it!" Chaos erupted. Hanley turned and fled toward the back exit. Nathan chased him, slipping on the wet concrete, his flashlight beam slicing through shadows. Outside, rain began again. Thin, cold, relentless. Hanley ran toward a black SUV parked behind the hangar. But something stopped him. A small figure stepped out from the trees, clutching a flashlight too big for her hands. "Daddy!" Nathan's heart stopped. "Lily!" Hanley froze, his eyes darting from Nathan to the girl. A smile spread slowly across his face. "Well, that changes things." Balto burst through the door behind Nathan, fur soaked, eyes blazing. He saw Hanley move toward Lily, and something in him snapped. The old husky sprinted, faster than any broken dog should have been able to. Hanley turned too late. Balto hit him in the chest, driving him into the mud. The gun in Hanley's hand went off, the bullet burying itself into the dirt inches from Lily's feet. Hanley screamed as Balto's teeth locked onto his arm. Nathan reached them seconds later, kicking the gun away. "Balto, enough!" The dog released him and stepped back, panting, eyes still burning. Hanley collapsed, clutching his arm, blood mixing with the rain. Nathan pulled Lily close. She was shaking but unhurt. "You shouldn't have followed me," he whispered, voice cracking. "I was scared for you," she said, "and for him." The distant wail of sirens broke the night then. Backup finally arriving after his emergency text had gone through. Hanley was arrested on site. The other men surrendered before dawn. The cages were opened, the surviving dogs rescued, and Balto sat by the entrance, rain soaking through his fur, eyes distant. Nathan crouched beside him, resting a hand on his neck. "It's over now, boy. You did it." Balto looked up, the stormlight reflecting in his eyes, tired, wounded, but free. And though Nathan didn't say it out loud, he knew that nothing about this would ever truly be over. Because somewhere in that ruined hangar, in the shadows of a failed experiment, Balto had remembered not what they made him, but who he had always been. A protector, a survivor, a soul that could never be broken. The days after the raid moved like a slow tide pulling, exposing and leaving things rearranged. News vans came for a morning. A reporter with bright teeth and an earnest voice asked Nathan to speak about courage and duty, while Lily stood a little to the side, clutching Balto's leash. The story bled beyond Pine Hollow, the images of rusted cages and wet dogs finding their way to feeds and front pages. People were shocked, then furious, then quietly generous. Boxes of food and towels appeared on Nathan's porch. A mechanic from town left an envelope with enough to cover several operations. Mrs. Rowley, who had been prickly before, now brought homemade soup and envelopes of old newspapers to line the cages. The town's heartbeat, usually slow and predictable, quickened into something tender and alive. Hanley's arrest spiraled outward. Federal agents took over the evidence, hauling crates and records away in cold, efficient trucks. Nathan answered questions for hours, trying to articulate things that were part memory and part gut, how an animal could remember an entire life of obedience and pain, how loyalty could outlast cruelty. There were hearings, subpoenas, and a sterile courtroom where Hanley sat with a face that looked smaller than in the photos. He denied much. He argued science and national security in a voice meant to be rational, but the photographs from the hangar, the logbooks, the conditioned response charts, and the testimony of handlers who had seen dogs break under the wrong stimuli all pinned him down like barbs. Balto watched none of that. He existed in moments, a lap in sunlight on the back step, the ripple of leaves in the yard, the soft weight of Lily's head against his flank at night. He slept often, and when he dreamt, his paws flicked and a sound half howl, half whisper escaped. And Lily would put her ear close and laugh softly, because the sound made her think of sleds and far-off snow. The vet stitched small wounds that never ran deep but hurt like old steel. He gave Balto antibiotics, gentle sedatives after his anxiety peaked, and a soft bed in a quiet room with a window that looked out over burgeoning grass. The limping never completely left him, a stubborn reminder of the life he'd had. Sometimes he'd favor the leg and sit with his chin on his paws, as if listening for a distant call. But his eyes, once hollowed by pain, filled with a bright, thorough light again, a light that watched, judged, and then forgave. Nathan spent his nights rebuilding the yard into something useful. He cleared space, put nails to wood, and with the help of neighbors erected a low fence, 3 kennels, and a small shed that smelled of cedar and lemons. Lily painted the sign for the gate in a messy script with sky blue letters. Balto's Haven. It wasn't much at first, only a small cluster of beds with donated blankets and a hand-me-down water pump fixed by Mr. Levin in the hardware store, but it was theirs. It was, in its smallness, an altar to what had survived. The more paperwork Nathan handled, the more he saw the vastness of things left undone. Hanley's enterprise had been part clandestine research and part market operation. Modified handlers and conditioned dogs sold through shell companies to men with money and little conscience. For every cage the town found that week, there were names in files across state lines. Nathan forwarded what he could to the agents. He wrote statements at odd hours. He learned legalese and how to keep his temper even when agents misfiled a crucial label. It was tedious, infuriating work, but necessary. When the federal prosecutor moved, indictments were drawn. Hanley pled not guilty. It would be a long fight. Nathan didn't think about the long fight. He thought about the small, quiet things that mattered right now. The way Balto would place his head on Lily's lap. The way the younger dogs would press against his warm side as if against a boulder. When spring pushed through the thaw, the makeshift kennel became something more. A place people could come to volunteer. A place children could bring mismatched toys. A place where old hands with scraped, softened fingers could teach how to feed, treat, and gently train. The first volunteer meeting was chaotic and beautiful. People brought leashes, towels, and a dozen fresh towels folded like sails. A retired nurse offered to bandage wounds for free. The postmistress organized a donation drive. A little girl from school bought a jar of cookies and handed it solemnly to Lily with the proclamation that she wanted to help the dogs that were sad. Lily accepted each contribution like a priestess receiving relics. Her gratitude was already part of the town's mosaic. Bruno, the name sometimes wandered back in whispers because humans can't entirely stop asking old questions, had been a special case, of course. Balto's story created momentum. A local reporter did a piece that aired on regional television, a slow montage of photos from the hangar, Hanley's court sketches, and footage of Balto standing like a monument. People cried in front of their televisions. Donations flooded in. With a modest grant in the community pool of funds, Nathan applied for nonprofit status. He stayed awake through forms and signatures until dawn, and when the paper finally came through with a neat official stamp, Balto's Haven, registered nonprofit animal rescue. He felt something loosen in his chest. There were bad moments. Lila, a husky from the cages who never trusted her own shadow, flinched when someone walked too quickly past. An elderly shepherd, once a guard dog, barked at blankets because they smelled of strangers. The rescue wasn't a movie where everything got better in a heartbeat. Healing took stitches that needed cleaning, medicines that needed giving twice a day, and volunteers who had to learn empathy not just as theory, but as labor. It ran on coffee, wet towels, and the slow procession of people who arrived to take a dog for a day, then for a week, and then for a lifetime. Adoption Day arrived like a weathered chapter. It was more of a town festival than anything else. Picnic blankets, handmade posters, a table for registration, and a little corner where Lily and the kids taught proper ways to pet and approach dogs. Bruno's Balto's bed sat in the shade near the entrance. He watched as puppies tumbled and as pairs of adults spoke quietly with potential adopters, matching rhythms and needs like a delicate barter. The day was a study in small redemptions. The battered Labrador Hope, as Lily had named her after a drawing she made, was the first to go. A young woman, hair dyed the color of sunflowers and a nervous smile, walked away with tears and a leash, swearing she would write every week. Buddy, Lily's puppy from under the bridge, stayed. Not everyone left, not every match stuck. But as the sun went down, the yard had fewer kennels, and more wagging tails found new hands. Balto did not seek glory. He hated the fanfare that trailed his name. When people came to meet him, he would stand for a moment and let a child stroke his neck, and then he'd walk away to the quiet corner of the yard, where Lily would follow him with a sketch pad. She would sit and draw lines and shades of him, as if capturing not merely his form, but the way he breathed. She grew taller, and with every new inch, her devotion deepened. Nathan watched them both with a steady face that sometimes broke in private. He watched Lily learn the business of mercy, and watched Balto teach the town how to lean into the ache of compassion. Winter's return was soft and kind that year, a light fall of flakes turning the yard into a hushed sanctuary. Balto's coat was thicker. His eyes retained their old light. He moved slower, certainly, but each motion seemed more considered, as if the ache in his leg had become part of a larger rhythm. On the coldest nights, he would wake, circle, and then lay his heavy head on Nathan's boot. Nathan took to leaving an old service blanket in the living room by the stove where Balto could sleep and listen to the slow click of the clock. One evening in late January, as a thin sun slid behind low clouds, a letter arrived for Nathan with official insignia, the prosecutor's office. Hanley had been convicted on multiple counts: illegal animal experimentation, trafficking, and conspiracy. The judge's sentence was not enough to right what had been done, but it was a definitive rebuke. Hanley received a term long enough to sit with his deeds and think, perhaps, about what loyalty meant when stripped of humanity. The courtroom footage ran in muted loops on channels, and in the Haven, the dogs barked like an unchoreographed choir when the news aired. Lily clapped like a child and then, in a smaller voice, said, "Did he say sorry?" Nathan looked down at her and could only answer what he truly felt. "He said a lot of things, honey. He didn't say the one thing that matters." She nodded and turned back to Balto. There were quieter victories, too. The handlers who once were complicit men who had looked away came back to testify, shaking with either regret or relief. The federal investigation widened and other operations were shut down. Families testified about missing dogs, and the network's thin, ugly veneer started to peel. Nathan knew more arrests were likely. He also knew the work would be endless, a spool of threads to be picked at in other towns and other courts. The world of wrongdoing was vast. The world of rescue was more patient. Spring returned again as it always did, with green edges fraying the yard and new puppies tumbling like laughter. Balto grew older. The veterinarian said his heart was strong, but the years had settled in his bones. He would never be an athlete again. He would never sprint across snowfields or pull a sled. But he was still a presence, steady, sure, grave, and warm. Lily learned how to tie bandages, how to coax a fearful animal out of a corner, how to sit with a whimpering creature and tell it stories about the moon. One late afternoon, after a long day of clinic visits and a few heroic adoptions, Nathan sat on the porch steps with Balto sprawled beside him. The dog's muzzle was streaked with white now, and his eyelids drooped with age. Lily came and sat with them, her sketchbook on her lap. Nathan felt a swell of something he had not felt in years. Not just relief, but a deep, fragile gratitude that the world, however broken, still found ways to be mended. "You know," Lily said, breaking the comfortable silence, "people say Balto saved us, but I think we saved him too." Nathan traced the old letters of the painted sign with a thumb. "Maybe," he said, "maybe he saved us both. Maybe that's the way we're supposed to do it together." Balto lifted his head, looked at both of them with that clear blue gaze, and stepped to his feet slowly. He limped to the fence and stood watching the valley, ears angled as if to catch an old distant song. He stood there a long time, listening to something only he could hear, and then he turned back and padded inside, his step steady as an old oath. That night, as wind whispered through the pines and the moon hung like a pale coin above the trees, Balto slept in his favorite place by the stove. Lily sat beside him and whispered a story she'd made up, a small tale about a dog who found his family by following a trail only he could see. Nathan watched them both, feeling the room hold its breath with a kind of holy quiet. Years later, when Lily was older and the Haven had grown into a real rescue with a proper roof and many kennels and a small staff, people would ask about the dog in the photograph. A photograph of a steel gray husky in an old patch collar, sitting on a porch with a girl and a man. The sign that read, Balto's Haven, in the background. They would ask how the town had changed. They would ask how hope arrived. And Nathan would answer, like a man who had been given a second kind of duty. It began with $5 and one small choice. It grew because people kept choosing to do the next right thing. Balto didn't only remember the bad things. He remembered the way to come home. Balto, the dog who remembered, lived out his days surrounded by a slow chorus of restitution. New collars that fit comfortably, a warm bed in winter, and laughter that meant something more than noise. His limp never disappeared. His eyes never forgot the past. But the last image anyone ever saw of him, on a photograph tucked into the foundation stone at the shelter, beside Lily's childish drawing and Nathan's simple signature, was of a creature finally allowed to rest. On his final morning, the world seemed to gather its kindness and press it into small rituals. A soft meal at dawn, a walk through the yard while the sun rose like a promise, a visit from Mrs. Rowley with a thermos of tea she swore would mend anything. Balto lay on the porch that day and watched the world make its ordinary miracles. Lily read him her sketchbooks aloud. Nathan sat still, hand over fur, feeling the slow receding of an old storm. When Balto slipped away, sleeping, not in pain, but in the gentle release of age, Lily sobbed, a sound as pure and ragged as the first howl he'd ever made in the hangar. Nathan held her and let the grief do its work. They buried him beneath the maple tree in the backyard, where his head had rested so many nights. Lily painted a small plaque and hammered it into the wooden fence. It read simply, "Balto, the dog who led us home." The town turned out in small waves, neighbors who'd once brought towels, volunteer staff who had grown into family, the kids from the adoption days who had learned to be kinder because of a mangy husky with haunted eyes. They left flowers or a string of dog biscuits or a note or a ticket stub from the county fair. People told stories and laughed and cried, and somewhere in those shared moments, the town stitched itself a little tighter. Years rippled forward. Balto's haven expanded into a place with an actual clinic and a rescue van, and classrooms where children learned empathy as if it were a craft. Nathan's hair grayed more, his shoulders stayed broad, and Lily taller now, with hands that knew how to heel ran the adoption schedules and taught the kids. They carried Balto with them in small ways. In the name on the sign, in the badge Nathan kept at the center of the office, and in the quiet rule they all lived by. Choose kindness when it's hardest. In the end, Balto's memory was not a chain that bound them to what had been done to him. It was a bridge to what could be done afterward. He had pulled them, one man and one little girl, out of a dark place, not by commanding heroics, but by remembering the way back. And when the world was most noisy and human stubbornness threatened to drown everything out, the town learned to listen for the quiet things. A paw on a step, a sketchbook opened, the soft scrape of a shovel returning earth to its place. Nathan kept the old photo of Balto on his desk, where the light fell each morning. Sometimes he would reach out and touch the glass. It felt warm, as if the dog was still there, waiting for the next person to need saving. He had come into their lives as a shadow with a price tied to his collar, and he had become a shape of light, steady, unshowy, and absolutely necessary. "Thank you," Lily whispered to the empty yard one evening, when the sky was the color of thin metal and the air smelled like coming rain. Nathan didn't answer because there was no need to. Balto had already heard them both, no matter where he was, and the world in all its mess and small miracles kept going, because someone, somewhere, had chosen to bring a wounded dog inside, and in doing so, had found a way to be whole again. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without subscribing. More powerful, true inspired stories of courage, hope, and second chances are coming next. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Let's see how far Balto's story travels.